For those people who are looking, the FDA just stepped up enforcement of pharma ad rules. This just came out earlier today. It's interesting because they sent out 100 cease and desist enforcement notices and thousands of letters. Obviously, it was not personalized in any way, which means that these are purely as an FYI. The key being not to create a misleading impression about the products, which is a good thing. However, I don't think it's as big a problem because to the extent there were misleading impressions, those misleading impressions would have been prosecutable the whole time, and there's no reason to think that they were not. There has been a downtrend overall, the number of enforcement letters that went out, and that's something that the Trump administration does call out. And that downtrend is more to do, in my opinion, with the fact that off-label marketing is now more consistent with the First Amendment than it was previous administrations. I expect that will not change. However, I think you might see an uptick in medical affairs, in drug advertising, enforcement from OIG and DOJ than from the FDA, who's really looking more from a regulatory perspective. President Trump signed a presidential memorandum, and as part of that presidential memorandum, he did say that there will be a step up in enforcement of direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical ads. I am curious why you need a presidential memorandum, because that enforcement power has existed the whole time. I think he's trying to make a point. I also think that it's interesting that they're not going to just go after drug makers, but also online pharmacies, which has been a continuing problem. Both Congress and the FDA have expressed concern about the proliferation of drug ads and how they are not necessarily compliant with the rules. This might be a warning call for pharmacies to recognize limitations. So if that's true, what you'd have to do is you would probably have to look at the FTC, because the FTC does regulate claims being made. On the other hand, if the FDA is going to take that on, you'd probably need some kind of agreement between the FDA and the FTC, where the FDA will take on those types of promotional campaigns and look at enforcement associated with them.
Follow our page on LinkedIn.
The use and role of social media influencers, that has become a growing concern over time. The word social media influencers is becoming more complicated, because does that just necessarily mean someone who has a large social media following, or does that also include celebrities, for example, who might themselves be social media influencers in their own right? What I also think is interesting is the plan to close the loophole that allows companies to refer patients to a website for information on side effects. I think that that's really interesting, because when you have that type of website, companies will continue to use their websites. However, you will not see as much of it on TV, and you'll see more on websites, because the referral will become a lot easier to do, and TV can become very, very expensive very, very quickly. I think the losers in this process lands up being TV producers. And I'd be surprised that that would last too long. President Trump made his chops, if you will, by being on TV. I'd love to see and hear more about what you guys think. Is this a done deal? Do you think the details will sort of reduce the impact as much as it could? Or am I missing something? Love to hear your thoughts.
Call, click, or email